Happy Tuesday, everybody. Thank you for joining us. It's going to be a great hour. My name is Dr. Raymond as I host this Ask the Experts webinar around Office 365 groups. This webinar is presented by Microsoft, AvePoint, our good friends from Hyperfish. And boy, this is going to be a jam-packed hour as we unpack and learn everything we can about Office 365 groups. Thank you for all that signed up. We have over 1,000 people signed up on this webinar. We're broadcasting live on Twitter and Facebook Live. For those that are on Twitter and Facebook Live, you can still jump on, and you're welcome to stay here and watch this too. This webinar is being recorded. All the resources, questions, and answers, we'll provide that soon after the webinar so you can share it with your colleagues as well. So let's go ahead and get the show started here. First and foremost, again, my name is Dr. Raymond. I serve as the CTO of AvePoint, and been very, very grateful and privileged to be part of this phenomenal ecosystem in the last 12 years or so, being a Microsoft Regional Director and MVP. And very excited to share the next hour with good friends from Microsoft, Christophe Fiessinger, and also Jeremy Thake. So Christophe, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Doug, and hello, everyone. My name is Christophe Fiessinger. I'm a program manager on the Office 365 Groups team, and I focus, among other things, Office 365 Groups to service, but also delivering an awesome experience in Groups in Outlook.
Thank you,
Hi,
Christophe.
Jeremy.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
Sorry, I was just jumping straight in, Doug. Hi, Jeremy Thake here. I work for a company called Hyperfish up in Seattle. I used to be at Microsoft for 3 years in the Office 365 and Azure space. You might have heard of me on the podcast I used to do with Richard Zariga on development. And I was actually at AvePoint before, so it's nice to be back in an AvePoint webinar.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeremy. And I got to tell everybody, I've known Christophe and Jeremy for a long time, and I remember the first time I met Jeremy, his hopes and dreams was quite different than what he's doing today, but it's all good, it's all great. But with that being said, remember, Jeremy, when you told me you want to be president?
I did. Actually, that was very topical back in 2009. I'm not quite sure why, but I said I was going to be the president of the United States. And now it might be within reach.
Hey, buddy, it's never too late. You're still young. So with that, let's go ahead and jump right on it. So what we're going to do, I'm going to turn over the stage to Christophe. Christophe will do a good overview and understanding of what Office 365 Groups is all about, how it can help your organization, and then we'll spend most of our time just discussing what opportunities there are and how we can help our organizations in maximizing Office 365 Groups. And throughout the session, if you guys have any questions at all, feel free to pop it in the chat room on Facebook or Twitter. We'll definitely get to it. And if we run out of time, we'll take all those questions and post it out as a blog post along with this recording as well. So with that, Christophe, over to you, and I'll have you take control of the slides.
Great. Thank you, Dux. So as Dux mentioned, I wanted to level set your understanding of groups, and maybe some of you are using it today. Maybe some of you have attended conferences in the past or have different level of knowledge. So the first, hopefully I'll be fairly quick, and I will apologize because I really want this to be interactive, as Dux mentioned, and that's why we get Jeremy and Dux so they can ask me all the hard questions and do a lot of Q&A. So I'm going to go very fast, but hopefully there's a lot of content if you have additional questions. And as Dux mentioned, happy to engage with you guys across social media or others if there's outstanding questions or requests that you might have. So the slides I'll present is first, typically the first section is why did we build groups, and why this is what is this all about in the world of collaborations in the enterprise. And then after I've presented what groups is and why we built it, then I'll switch gear and talk a little bit about the technicalities, since my understanding is most of you are IT professional and technical audience. So I'll talk about, you know, how can you administer groups, and how does it, what are different options to manage it within your directory and stuff like that. And then I'll just wrap up with additional resources that might be useful for you to get started on your journey to leveraging groups in your Office 365 tenant. So again, let's get started. And typically, you know, starting with the why, hopefully I'm preaching to the choir, but this is a slide we use where, you know, collaboration has changed quite a bit in the workplace. And, you know, there's one stat on this slide that says, you know, we need to collaborate more than ever on projects, obviously a lot more than 5 years ago, and that's one of the stats that we have here. The other thing that we've seen in the workplace is there's a greater diversity than we had in the past. 20% today of the workforce is composed of temporary workers, for instance, contractors and freelancers. And that means those people are not part of your Active Directory. They're outside of the HR world, yet they're still team members or contributors that might help you on projects and whatever you're working on as a group. Geography distributed, typically the stats is 30% of the global workforce now is mobile, and 30% of full-time employees actually do most of their work outside of your location, outside of, the physical office that the company provides. So again, that's creating needs from your workforce to be able to be mobile and work wherever they are, and not necessarily be sitting in a cubicle to get work done. And then the last, which is definitely important for some of us that have been in the workforce for a while, is there's different generation, different habits, different maturities, and certainly the millennials that are the bulk that are coming in the workforce are a big force in driving change, and have very different expectations in the workforce than, let's say, when Christophe or Doug started a couple of years ago, where we get trained on the one-page memo to make decisions and drive consensus to go about our day-to-day projects. So that's just a glimpse of what has changed in the world of collaboration. And then this next slide talks about not only there's those cultural changes and diversity in the workforce, but there's also different needs that evolve on how you get work done in an organization, whether it's large or small, whether it's commercial or government or education. And this provides kind of a panel of some of the key functionality or key tasks that groups need. And one that's typically fairly new, that's fairly hot, and a lot of people have questions, is this notion of chat-based workplace. And the idea is I might not have time for asynchronous communication, and I need rapid fire to go back and forth, let's say, with Jeremy, and hey, we're both working on some code, and maybe the build is not working, or it's breaking, or maybe I'm dependent on a code fix or change from him before I check in my code, yada. Obviously, mail on calendar, I don't need to introduce that. It's been around, that's one of the forms that's been around the longest, and we still think there's a place for the ubiquity of email, the formality that email provides, and so forth. Voice on video, that's pretty much what we're doing today, whereas we're real time. Obviously, we didn't put the webcam on, but it's a very popular way to get work done and collaborate with your colleagues. Co-creating content, think of, it's great to, as a group, to communicate, but hopefully you're also working on deliverable, whether it's specifications, a deliverable, a price code, a timesheet, whatever it is. Hopefully you're producing something to move your company forward, whatever services and products you offer. Site on content management, think hopefully all the intellectual property, the deliverables, the assets you're producing, hopefully there's a life cycle around it and you manage those and think of that bubble responding to that need. And enterprise social is something that's risen, started about 8 years ago, which is the whole notion of reaching out throughout the organization. You're breaking silos. It doesn't matter if you're a new hire, if you're the president, if you're in engineering or sales, but there's topics that spans your entire organization where you want everyone's potential eyes and opinions and ideas, and make sure everyone notices or potentially can provide help. Now, in addition to those different needs that groups have today, there's definitely additional challenges that we've seen, and siloed apps create friction. You have different notifications, different credentials, different security and compliance, and I know probably a lot of you have to deal with that on a day-to-day basis. And typically going hand with that is this notion of shadow IT, which is an employee today with any device, their favorite iPhone, whatever smartphone that they have, they can pretty much, if the tool that provided by the organization doesn't fulfill their needs, they can pretty much download the app of choice that they think meets their need and invite their colleagues and contractors and go about doing their business without asking anyone's approval, certainly not their employers nor IT. And this is definitely a challenge in the enterprise today, again, with the proliferations of a smart device. Now, this leads us into the next slide, which is, okay, what are we doing, Microsoft, from an Office 365 perspective, which is our productivity suite? And can you guys still hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello, hello.
Hey, Christophe, we can hear you loud and clear. All right. So, well, while I think Christophe is kind of signing back in, I think just to pick up on where he's going with this is from a Microsoft perspective, Office 365, as you've seen in the last 5 years, I think it's what how old Office 365 is providing a lot of different methods and tools and capabilities to address the unique work style of different groups of people. Recently, we saw Microsoft Teams. We had a great blog post about that. We had a great webinar about that to provide that gap around chat-based workspace. Microsoft's still leading and continuing to invest around mail and calendaring through Outlook and Exchange Online. And we've seen the growth and innovation around Skype. One of the most exciting things around Skype, especially in the Office 365 GovCloud last week, it was last week or 2 weeks ago, was officially, E5 is now officially available, the E5 SKU for the GovCloud, which obviously Skype is a big part of it for voice communication. Content co-creation. With Office 365 Pro Plus, both on the desktop for Office and also obviously online, the ability to co-create content with different capabilities such as co-authoring or even jumping into Teams and working on documents. And later on we'll talk more about groups, the ability to work on content with groups and Teams and SharePoint and OneDrive, all that has been certainly made available throughout the platform. With sites and content management, SharePoint, which has been around for a while, but the continuous innovation around that with the recent announcement of the modern team sites and the SharePoint development framework, so we can continue to extend and enhance that experience.
Okay.
Hey,
I'm back. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. And then Enterprise Social, I kind of went through the different offerings Microsoft has. I stopped at Enterprise Social.
Okay, so I apologize for that. Went to a backup plan, the good old landline. So hopefully Doug did presented my slides. But seriously, so I talked about the why, and here's the different. Here's how we're addressing those different needs for different groups. And we've talked about chat-based workplace, and think of a Microsoft Team, which we just announced last November, which will release the first quarter of this year. Obviously, now on calendar, think of Outlook in all its endpoints, whether it's the rich desktop, the browser form, or the mobile app. Think voice and video to address that need. Our solution is obviously Skype for Business. Co-creating content, think of Office Pro Plus, which is our desktop apps, streamlined to your favorite device. Obviously, we also have a browser version of our desktop apps. And then to store all the content, the solution for that is SharePoint. I want to stress that because sometimes people confuse OneDrive for Business. Typically, we say OneDrive for Business is more for your personal file, even though you can do some lightweight collaboration. But through enterprise content management and the rigor that typically a company needs, the answer to store your content is in SharePoint Online. And then Enterprise Social, we've acquired Yammer, I think, almost 5 years ago. And, that's our solution to reach out to the enterprise. And, whether you have a community of interest or a community of practice and you want to tap the collective knowledge, then for that, the sweet spot is to leverage Yammer. Now, all those applications and services are built on a common fabric. And that's what Office 365 groups provide. It gives you the ability to go from one app to another with a single membership across the suite. Now, moving forward to double-click on what Office 365 groups is, let me, again, explain, since sometimes I see a little confusion of people confusing the membership service from the individual app. And this slide gives you a little overview where, again, group is a membership service. So typically think of the life cycle. A user comes in, groups is self-service by nature, and they start in the app of choice, whatever they're trying to do. They can start in Teams, they can start in Outlook, they can start in SharePoint. Soon they'll be able to start in Yammer, or they can already today leverage Planner, for instance. And they create a group within those apps. What happens in the back end is we actually make a call to Azure Active Directory, where we create that container, which is the group. And, it has a name, it has a descriptions, it has a logo, and more importantly, it has a set of members. And, there's two types of members. There's just owners, typically the person created it, and members as part of the group. And once that's created, then, you can go in the application again that you started and go about doing your business, whether you're using a board in Planner to do whatever breakdown structure of your project, or wherever you start some back and forth chat in Teams and so forth. So that's the high level. Obviously, this happens in seconds. And again, what I want to stress is don't confuse groups, the service, from the individual app that are built on top of groups. And that's what kind of like the bottom of the slides stresses. You get one identity for the groups. The master is Azure Active Directory, and it has all those properties, and it kind of does the handshake with all the application. If you created a group in Outlook and you want to store content, then in the back end, we've already provisioned a full team site for that group, so that, when you're ready to upload a document, then, you can do so, and you don't have to worry about creating a team site or vice versa. That's what we mean by set of resources. All those groups get a common set of resources, whether it's a SharePoint team site, a OneNote to do note taking, or whatever ideation, all the great things you can do with OneNote. A common set of project management tools, which is Planner, and obviously different group messaging options, whether you're using Outlook, Teams, or Yammer. The other point is there's some loose coupling. So when you create things, let's say you create a team site, there is, it's not instantaneous, but there's a little bit of latency between all the other workloads are provisioned. So you can go about your business to work with SharePoint, and hopefully shortly thereafter you do have the shared inbox if you want to start emailing the groups. But there's constantly that back and forth between Azure Active Directory and all the workload, depending on what you're doing with the group. So that's the high level of group membership service. Now, the next couple of slides, let's talk briefly on how can you manage the group. So again, as I said, by nature, groups are public and self-service, which is the whole beauty to cater to that new generation where people need to move fast to stay competitive. Now, with that, an end user, which is the box in the upper left corner, can create the group. There's no friction. There's no need to have IT step in and request something. The users can manage the group, add members, remove members, and so forth, and change attributes of the groups. Now, with that, you can also obviously always step in as an administrator, and you can create groups on behalf of the users. You can use it. You can create groups using our tenant Office 365 admin portal, or you can use PowerShell. You can use REST API, and so forth. The other thing that typically people ask is, okay, great, it's self-service, but how do I group my directory, and what are some of the bounds on checks that I can put in terms of governance to manage those groups? And those are kind of some of the things that we've delivered during the past 2 years since groups have been in production. But one of the popular ones is dynamic membership, and we delivered that over a year ago, which is the ability that, let's say, think of very large group, maybe organizational-based group, like all the employees reporting to vice president, for instance. You don't want someone, a single person, to manage who's in, who's out, and instead you might do a query on, say, everyone reporting to Dux, wherever they're based in the U.S. or worldwide, how many managers there is between Dux and those employees, should just be part of that group. And near real time, the membership of that team fluctuates depending on those attributes. The other thing that we've delivered a while ago was naming policy, which is the ability to add a prefix and suffix on a group name. Now, the naming policy only applies today for the Outlook endpoints. There's one popular item on our roadmap, which is extend that naming policy to all the endpoints, whether you create a group through SharePoint, through Teams, through Planner, and that's something that's on a roadmap, and I'll talk about it later. Hidden membership, again, the idea is, well, you can browse and look at the groups, in the directory for specific regulatory reasons or confidentiality. There's some groups where you should be able to see that, hey, Docs is part of this group. So we support that. And then last but not least, group creation permission. And the idea is, in certain use cases, you might not want self-service, and you can absolutely control who gets to create group, but maybe you only want folks in IT to create groups. And we absolutely support that. Now, the only caveat I tell before you go in on remove creation is, it's a double-edged sword. Yes, you can remove creation to all your employees, but potentially if you make it too hard, whatever the process that you're going to tell the employee to follow to create a group, whether it's fill in a form or whatever, if you make it too hard, remember, our employee always have the choice to pick up their phone and pick whatever app of choice they can find in the App Store and go about doing their business. So, I've seen people being very happy turning off permissions, but on the other hand, seeing shadow IT projects being rampant. So, yes, it's possible, but really think twice about not making it too hard for people to request the creation of a group to get work done. Other things we've delivered to, again, help you with governance is this notion of data classification and usage guideline. So, again, it's, us and Microsoft, we have a 3-tier classification, low, medium, and high. And, the idea, again, is to remind people that, this is in the context of a workplace, and maybe there's things that users should remember that they should do or not do. For instance, if it's customer data or financial data, then it should be classified as high, it should be private, so not everyone in the company can see it, and so forth. Same thing with usage guidelines. It's a good reminder to tell users, like, again, those groups are created in the context of a workplace, and I'm sure you get human resources guidance on how to engage and more importantly, what not to do in any tools that you have available today. In-place role need discovery. This is obviously not everyone needs it, but it's available for, I don't know, I think it's been over a year now. But for the people that do have cases and need their legal team to step in, you can absolutely do that and freeze all the assets and see what happened in case you have some litigation going on. Additional thing that not a lot of people sometimes are aware, but help you with that notion of governance is that at all points, you administrators are in charge. And, one thing we had for a long time is we do have audit log. And at the most granular level, we do track all the circadian activities around groups. Who added a group? Hey, Jeremy created a group. Jeremy updated a group. Jeremy added Docs to a group, and so forth. So you can always audit, hey, why did Jeremy create 5 marketing groups? But maybe you had to reach to Jeremy. It's like, do you really need 5? Or maybe we should consolidate, and so forth. So we do track that, and you can query the audit log search both in the Office 365 admin portal or in Azure AD. You can create your own API if you want to create a data store. The other report that we released in the fall is the group activity report. Again, it gives you IT, what are the popular groups, how many members that it have, how much storage are we consuming, and so forth. So again, you can see what's going on, and maybe, on the popular group, you want to reach out to the team and say, why is this working so well for you that maybe you want to share success to other teams, or on the contrary, you have groups that are no longer being used, and maybe it's time to delete those groups. Same thing, we get a SharePoint site usage report. A lot of people say, oh, how do I view the storage consumed by the groups? And yes, as I mentioned earlier, every group gets a SharePoint site. There's a report that shows that visually, and you can narrow down to groups, and you can again see, how much quotas you've assigned to each group and how much is consumed. So again, you're always a step ahead of the users, and you can see if a group is going to run into trouble or not. And then as with everything else, we do have PowerShell commandlet if you want to do some more granular auditing and reporting on some of those groups activities in your tenant. Now, a couple more slides on around administration. What are we building next? And those are some of the popular items that we're working on. It's not an exhaustive list, but let me run through some of those items that that we'll be delivering soon. So deletion recovery, the notion is if you delete a group, you don't want the group to be completely deleted and potentially have a kind of a 30-day grace period where you can still recover it. So maybe you can save some assets before it's completely gone. And hopefully next month is when we're going to start rolling this to first release. Initially, it'll be script-based, so you got PowerShell commandlet, and later we'll give you administrative interface to do that deletion recovery. Expiring groups is as simple as you're going to set an expiration policy, let's say 90 days, and let's say Jeremy created a group for Hyperfish. He's going to get a reminder after 90 days, hey, Jeremy, you still need that marketing campaign group. And as the owner of the group, either he responds to email, say, yeah, I want to retest. That's an ongoing group that I use day in, day out. So extend the life of the group. If he doesn't retest that he needs that group, then the group will go 30 days later in a soft delete mode and another 30 days after that in a hard delete. So it's a great way to automate and groom that Active Directory and potentially delete some of those groups that are no longer needed. Preservation and deletion policy, that's something that I've been testing in my demo tenant, and this is great. Basically, think of whereas expired group deletes the entire group and all its assets, this is a little more granular. And maybe you want to set a deletion policy on, let's say, messages and content store in SharePoint. Maybe you say, I don't want to retain any messages in Outlook or any document that are older than 90 days. So you can do that, and preservation policy is the reverse and then you can preserve to infinity. So this is coming very soon. Those first three are coming in the next 2 months-ish. Naming policy, as I mentioned earlier today, naming policy only applies for Outlook endpoints. We're elevating that to Azure Active Directory, so it applies to all the endpoints. This one is going to be coming in the spring. And alongside naming policy, we'll also be delivering ban word and profanity checking, so that, again, there's obviously obvious words, especially if you're in education, school or university, that you don't want your students to leverage. Oops. Couple more slides, and then we'll open up for Q&A. One feature that we delivered in the fall, in September, that we started rolling out is this notion of guest access. And I already mentioned in the introduction that, working with folks outside of the firewall is becoming more and more important in the workplace, just because of the proliferation of independent contractors in the workplace. And guest access, which we deliver again, is a step in that direction. And the power of guest access that I explained in that slide is it's not just for B2B, like you want to add Christophe at Microsoft in your tenant so you can ask questions about groups. No, maybe Christophe might have a Gmail account, a non-Microsoft account, and it works with any account or any email address that's available out there. So basically you would add, as an owner of the group, guest@gmail.com, for instance, to the group. And automatically that identity is actually added in Azure Active Directory. That person is now an object in AD. Now Christophe at Gmail will log in. And since it's a non-Microsoft account, we'll create on the fly a Microsoft service account to map to that Gmail account. And from there on, I get access to all the conversation in Outlook and, all the documents, the OneNote, and all the stuff that the team is sharing. Now, typically, there's a lot of questions about this, and the 2 links at the bottom provides a lot more additional information on how can you administer and also how does it work from an end user. So that's a glimpse of guest access supported with in groups in Outlook today. Okay, the other point I want you to think about is, I mentioned that collaboration change, and one of the things that I want to stress is, we think that DLs, distribution lists or distribution groups as they're called in Active Directory, definitely had a place in the sun back in the days, but we do think for a lot of reasons that groups in Outlook is a better way forward if you want to leverage, if you want to collaborate over email. The number one reason typically I give it is get a history of all the conversation, whereas DL, if you join on Monday, you have no idea what Dux and Jeremy said the week before or the month before. So we have an article that provides some of those talking points in addition to all the administrative capabilities that you can do. But we also deliver ways for you to automatically, with one click, upgrade those DLs to groups. And then think, okay, 2 more slides, and then we'll start to, we'll go to Q&A. So the next question is, okay, great. I get the point. Let's move up DL and so forth. How do I help my users get started? And our answers for that across 365 is Fast Track. You know, it's our users and adoption portal that gives you all the assets you need to start with 365 and drive usage and adoption. And guess what? We have a set of videos already available today. And for instance, yesterday, we also have a set of content to help you start with Microsoft Teams. And obviously, there's content to help you leverage SharePoint and so forth, or Skype for Business. So I really want you, if you haven't used Fast Track, to go and leverage all the assets that are available to then in turn pass that on to your end users to help them get value out of what you purchase, which is Office 365. And last slide, and then we'll go to Q&A. So one thing I want to stress is that I mentioned earlier, so we're obviously continuing to invest in groups, and think of there's continued investment across each experiences. Yes, we continue to invest in Outlook. As I mentioned, you know, yes, you have, for instance, you can like an email in groups, and, you know, we've done calendaring improvements and so forth. And then Microsoft Teams, obviously, we haven't even shipped, but based on all the feedback, we're taking a ton of feedback and incorporating that to make it an awesome experience. But think of investments across all the individual experiences. And then in addition to that, we're also obviously investing in Office 365 groups, and I give you a couple things that we're doing, for instance, to help you with group administration and governance. And then obviously, in addition to that, we'll also continue to invest in the individual administrations of each of those workloads. So again, I didn't want to list all those things. If you got questions on what's coming, you know, there's one stop for all the roadmap items are on fasttrack.microsoft.com. And the last couple of things I want to give you as call to action before we switch to Q&A, I really want you to revisit those distribution lists and migrate or upgrade as many of them as possible to Office 365 groups. I want you to leverage all the content on Fast Track to drive usage in your tenant. And last but not least, we're always open for feedback. And, you know, we're trying to be very agile and very fast on all those workflows. So give us feedback on what can we improve or what's missing via our technical community. So with that, I think I'll pass the mic to Dux and Jeremy.
Awesome. Well, Christophe, I tell you, there's so much goodness in the last set of presentations and slides you talked about. I think one of the key main points is baby steps, right? I love your call to action next steps. If you haven't, move your distribution list to groups. It may be overwhelming with a lot of things, you know, how do I administer and all that, but unless you start using it and take a very pragmatic approach with things that people do today, like distribution lists, it's hard to get your head around it and really uncover all the possible use cases. Jeremy, what do you think? What are some of the feedback and thoughts based on what Christophe went through?
Yeah, I think the big takeaway for me was that, you know, much like when people used or collaborated with documents before things like the cloud existed, you were working on a local file system or on a network file drive, and the benefits that you got from then transitioning to SharePoint to store your documents, to kind of collaborate together on those documents. I believe is the same kind of transition that you get when you're moving from a distribution list where you're very email-centric to moving into this kind of Office 365 groups aspect where you're taking what you used to do always in a distribution list and now doing the same thing but in an environment where there's a lot more kind of sugar around it to help you even more from a productivity side within your teams. And I think that's kind of definitely a key advantage I've been seeing with customers that have been flipping over to these distribution lists. I guess the other thing, my takeaway here, and just looking at the Q&A questions that have come through, and I'm hearing this a lot kind of outside of this webinar as well, Christophe, is, I guess the question back to you is, and your last slide, I don't know if you can flip back to that slide, but it's quite pertinent in terms of how you guys at Microsoft are positioning this, is a lot of questions come up when Teams was introduced because it has this notion of conversations, much like the notion that Yammer has and also the Groups and Outlook has in terms of email distribution lists. How are you kind of explaining, you know, is Teams replacing Groups, or is there this definition between what an Office 365 group is and what a group in Outlook is? Maybe you could explain a little bit more just to try and maybe eliminate about 50% of the questions in that list.
Great. That's going to be easy then. So basically, we don't think one size fits all for conversation. And, typically there's a slide, maybe I should have included, where we think Teams is for what we call chat-based workspace. And what we mean by that is typically think of the use case where you need to iterate rapidly. And that's why I use for the example, for instance, Dux and I and maybe Jeremy will developers. We're checking code in, out. We don't have time to send an email. If Dux broke the bill or if I'm waiting for Jeremy to check in a method or whatever, or an API, I need him to check it in so I can complete my checking and so forth. Or if all three of us are working on the cover page of the Seattle Times, or if all three of us are working on a live webinar, we don't have time for, we need that rapid fire back and forth, right? If all three of us are traders on Wall Street on commodities, I want to know why Dux is going high on coal and why Jeremy is going low on oil, so that I can make an informed decision on which position I should take. So again, all those use cases like near real time, and that's what we mean by chat-based workplace. On the other end, the other extreme is think maybe, can you wait a couple milliseconds? Can you wait a couple seconds for a response? And if yes, then maybe that's what you use all along today with things like email. So, I'm putting two extremes next to one another. And another part of the question is, hey, Teams is based on groups, which was that first diagram that I showed earlier. So you create a team, guess what? You're creating an object in Active Directory called Office 365 group. And every time you create a new team, you create another group. So don't confuse group, the membership service, from the individual app. And the last part of the question is, how is Teams and Yammer, and what's the difference? Again, like typically what we say is Yammer is for enterprise social, and another way to think about Yammer is about connecting across your organization. So if it's not a rapid fire close-knit team that's a set of traders, a set of editorial team or developers working together, but instead the use case is, let's say we're launching a product. We need to reach out across the entire team. We need to tell our sellers. We need to tell our support team. We need to tell our engineering team. We need to tell our PR team, hey, we're launching this. Here's the press release. In that use case, it's not just target a very precise set of individuals. We want everyone in the company to know we've announced this and backing up this great product we've just launched. Or another use case is a community of practice or a community of interest. It's not just the people that I know that care about gaming, but maybe there's folks that care about gaming that I've never met just because we're not physically in the same building. We're a large organization. So for that, Yammer is definitely a great tool where, it's enterprise social. You're reaching out across the entire enterprise, whether you're announcing or you're crowdsourcing or getting feedback. So again, different use cases for conversation across those three modalities. And because obviously we heard your feedback that people are confused, we're going to provide content. And we have some on Fast Track to help you figure out what is the sweet spot for each of those tools in terms of use cases.
And that's what I really want to stress, and what I love about what Christophe is describing. Microsoft is providing opportunities for us in the enterprise to enable different business use cases. Really, the conversation, and we're getting to it, shouldn't be, should I use Yammer, should I use Teams, should I use groups? As the business enablers, as IT, our job is to help hone in on what that business use case is. Is it a fast-paced collaboration that Teams would fit, or is it more of an enterprise-wide that where Yammer comes in? Or maybe it's just one-on-one where email fits, and it's that constant drive and innovation that Microsoft provides is what's exciting, because at the end of the day, even if Microsoft doesn't provide these capabilities and technologies, guess what? Your business may still go out there and use similar tools that they would have to pay for that we're not governing. And the beauty of this is part of the Office 365 platform and Office 365 stack. Now, I think we got to jump into Q&A. There's tons of awesome questions. Now, just to put a little disclaimer, in the interest of time, we've tagged some of the high-profile questions, but we're committed to answer all the questions that we have. If we don't get to it in this webinar, we'll post it on our blog. We'll send out an FAQ, and this recording will also go out. So first question, Christophe, we talked about directory management. Are there any limitations for groups with Azure AD in comparison to groups with on-premises AD? Can you expand on that a little bit?
So we do have some published limitation, which is just a starting point. But I can tell you, I've worked with customers that over 500,000. There's no limitation on the number of groups you can have. What I was alluding to is I work with customers that have over 500,000 members in a group. So, stepping back, Azure Active Directory is our identity in the cloud. That's what's used every time you create a tenant. It's our big bet. So while I'm not aware of any physical limit on how many number of objects we have, trust me, there's very, very large customers that are using Azure AD and happy doing so. So, again, going forward, Azure AD is our identity in the cloud. That's what power identity for users and any other objects in AD. So it's definitely something we've done a ton of investment, and we continue to invest to scale to even larger numbers.
Awesome.
So I guess, Christophe,
go ahead.
Sorry, as a follow-up to that, with the administration service side, Christophe, I like the idea you're kind of differentiating the conversations that you can see in Outlook compared to the underlying kind of infrastructure that's provisioning all these things. One of the questions there was when you delete the actual Office 365 group, does it go and delete all of the other things it's provisioned, like the SharePoint site, like the Microsoft team, like the Yammer group, et cetera, of all the different things that it goes to provisions for that group? How does it kind of clean up after itself?
Yeah, so good question. Pretty much when you create a group, it provisions all the services. When you delete it, it should delete all the associated services. So if you're not seeing that, then it's definitely something we should fix. Typically, there's a little bit of latency. For instance, by the time you delete a group, let's say in Outlook or in Planner, and by the time, let's say, the team site that's associated with that group gets deleted. Like I said earlier, it's like a little loose coupling. But that delay shouldn't be more than an hour. If you're not seeing things being cleaned up after you delete a group, definitely reach out to a support organization because it should be deleted. And that also the reason why today, that's why we're introducing self-delete, because some people deleted a group thinking, hey, I don't need it. Whereas maybe not one member of the team or the group say, oh, I still need that PowerPoint or that whatever, that note. And unfortunately, that got deleted. So that's why we're putting self-delete. It was a little too easy to delete everything.
Got it. So speaking of deletion, what's the retention on that? Is it similar to like OneDrive or SharePoint recycle bin? Is there a certain time where we can still cover those with that's been?
So today, that's why we're working on self-delete that I mentioned earlier. So today, there's no retention. It gets deleted within an hour, everything is gone. Self-delete will put a 30-day retention so that, someone can, initially, like I say, it will be through PowerShell, so only admin can do so. But later, it'll be end users where they can recover the group themselves or make it active again because they were a little too quick at deleting it.
All right. Awesome. So next question, and this is maybe for Jeremy. This is from James from Mayo Clinic. What are your recommendations or best practices for controlling organic growth and balancing self-service creation with governance? Jeremy, by the way, friends, has been putting out a lot of phenomenal content around groups and teams, when to use what. So make sure you follow him on Twitter and a lot of the blog content it's putting out. So what's some of the top-of-mind recommendations you have, Jeremy? And I have some thoughts around this, too.
Yeah, sure. I think what Christophe said earlier on at the beginning of the webinar around, the more control and layers you put in play of something, the more resistance you're putting to them getting their job done, and they're likely to kind of go out and use shadow IT and spin up other services. And I think that's why things like Slack and that have become so prominent. But the problem with those services is that IT can't control them. They don't have the compliance that Office 365 has. They're not looped in with all of the e-discovery and other aspects of more of the data privacy aspects of bigger concerns that large companies have. But I also feel like whatever Microsoft do from a out-of-the-box experience, and it's great to see things like kind of deletion on the roadmap there being more improved, is I believe that there'll always be this need that maybe on top of kind of what they allow in terms of creating these more rapidly is that you might want to have for certain workspaces these kind of workflows in play. And I know, for instance, tools like governance automation kind of have that need of that self-service with a little bit more control over the top. And so it's really down to your organization in terms of how open you let these things be. Microsoft seems to put a lot of in place. You can see there from the roadmap there around different naming rulings that will happen as it goes and creates the underlying children parts of the Office 365 groups. I know that's part of the concern, is that people are calling these things the right things, and obviously that they have owners for its lifetime. So if the group, as Christophe was just saying, isn't being used, that it's going to chase out and keep kind of ownership tied to a certain person. So I think once you've got those automated processes in place, that it's not kind of created and left and forgotten, and then 3 years later the IT department's got to realize what they can and can't clean up, that's going to definitely make things easier from a product feature perspective, both from what Microsoft provides out of the box and what companies like AvePoint will provide. I guess, Dux, you maybe be able to talk a little bit more in context of what AvePoint do to help on top of what they do out of the box.
Yeah, I mean, quickly, to your point, I was speaking with a customer yesterday, and there was a group created in this organization. It's a massive organization. They're doing a pilot, and this group from the business unit called the group IT. So they created groups called IT, which in essence spawned off a bunch of different things. So it created a SharePoint site collection called IT, but this group's not IT. So there's a lot of that, right? And from a governance perspective, certainly Microsoft has done a good job in this initial stages of providing mechanisms and capabilities to help manage this. But certainly, as you think about expanding the usage and driving adoption, there are options out there through the partner ecosystem. So, in fact, in 2 weeks, we have a whole webinar just on how do you best manage and take care and provide good governance around your group's implementation. So we have a webinar around that in 2 weeks. So I encourage everybody to join that webinar as well. We'll send you the details. All right, so I'm going to hit on a couple of questions. Let's see, there's a lot of great questions. Just trying to pick. So Jeremy, this is for you. Maybe something more tactical and more use case driven. Why or when should I use groups versus SharePoint sites? I mean, living in the world of SharePoint, right? We get SharePoint, but then now with groups and teams and Yammer, but just kind of comparing the two, pros and cons of groups and SharePoint sites.
Yeah, and I think it comes back down to that slide of the different presentation layers and a technology kind of capability, which is that when I create a SharePoint site, I get this notion we had to create document libraries and custom lists and so forth and task lists, and people are familiar with the pages within SharePoint. But then if I'm creating an Office 365 group, not only am I getting this notion of kind of an email distribution list on steroids, I guess is the best way to explain it, with a document library and with the ability that it's going to go provision a SharePoint site and now a Yammer group and Microsoft Teams, is that you're getting a lot more capability for your team collaboration you're doing by leveraging all these different services. So yes, you could just create a SharePoint site, but then you don't get all the benefits of everything else that the Office 365 group is creating. I think one of the biggest things I'm seeing customers find of benefit there is that when you create an Office 365 group, it's an Azure Active Directory group, which means that when you're managing security membership to it, you're actually doing that at the AD level, which means that other services that are aware of Active Directory can use that membership aspect for their own benefits as well. Whereas if you kind of create a SharePoint group, a SharePoint site, you'll get different SharePoint groups within that SharePoint site, but the membership and the management of those SharePoint security groups is within SharePoint. It's not really usable outside of the walls of that SharePoint team site. And I find that as a real huge benefit there, because the membership of the groups that happens at that Office 365 group level is usually controlled by who's the owner of that group. And so you don't have this problem of spinning up a SharePoint team site with a managing membership there, and then maybe you've got a distribution list that you're controlling for the marketing department as well. Now you've got to manage membership in two places, rather than taking the benefit of creating that Office 365 group and letting that kind of provision all the things down. Now I guess a follow-up question to Christophe on this is, from a provisioning perspective, and this really comes down to that governance aspect, is it is kind of spinning up all of those things. And one of the questions we have in the list there is can you control what gets provisioned? So rather than kind of giving me a SharePoint site and a Yammer group and a Microsoft team and a planner board, can I kind of decide which things get lit up when I go and provision that Office 365 group?
And the answer is no, you don't get to, it's that loose coupling, but you can go a la carte, say, oh, I just want a team site, or I just want an inbox, or I just want a calendar, or I just want planner. Not today.
Yeah, and so I think, a lot of people are having that concern that then kind of, there's a lot of different buckets of content that will be in those different products. So what would be your guidance if, as a consumer, when they navigate to, say, the marketing Office 365 group, that some people might be kind of collaborating without knowing in the Yammer group, and some might be collaborating in a Microsoft team, and some could be discussing inside of groups inside of the Outlook interface. How would you guide people to try and keep on top of those conversations and to make sure they're not missing out and not aware that something kind of business critical for the marketing group might be happening in one of those conversational services?
Yeah, I think so that's a good question. I think the most basic thing is, as a team, again, I don't know if it's a team-based group or a project-based group or organizational-based group, but hopefully, let's say it's a project and Dux, Jeremy, and I are working on a project. We all agree what medium are we going to use to communicate. And typically, if we say, oh, we're going to use email, or we're going to use Teams, or we're going to use Twitter or whatever, hopefully not Twitter, once you agree, then that will be the medium that I'm going to track on a day-to-day basis. Internal at Microsoft, there's groups that are using Teams, and that's what I use because that's what collectively the group has decided to use to communicate. Other teams that I work with are more email-centric, and certainly others are more Yammer-centric. So typically, I do sometimes go from one to the other just to track, because teams, like I said earlier, take different options that fulfill their needs. There is definitely some potentially me going from one to the other. We're looking at improving that, giving you notifications and closing some of the seams as you navigate from one experience to another. So there's definitely work that needs to be done, and that we're actually already working on to help you seamlessly if you need to leave whatever experience you're in. Let's say you're in SharePoint and you want to check a conversation related to the group. If you need to go to Outlook on the web, we want to make it as seamless as possible so that we remove the friction to go from one experience to another.
Awesome. I want to jump in. So, okay, I love the energy. I love all these questions. A bunch of people are asking, hey, Dux is great. There's going to be a webinar in a couple of weeks around better management, but I need help right now. Or what tool do you guys have at AvePoint that can help get us started? So we do have a technology. It's called Governance Automation Online. It can help govern your Office 365 platform, not only with groups, SharePoint, OneDrive, the whole stack. So just go to our website, avepoint.com. And then you'll find our solutions for Office 365. This technology is called Governance Automation Online. And certainly we'll unpack that more in our webinar in 2 weeks. And then for those that are interested in Jeremy's coverage of groups and teams and whatnot, look him up. I'm sure you'll find the one and only Jeremy Thake. Bing him, Jeremy Thake. You'll find his blog. You'll find his videos on YouTube, all that good stuff. So there's this one question. I know we're about 5 minutes left for the webinar, but this is a fascinating question from Oliver. So this is for you, Christophe. As more of these groups are being used, as conversations come up, as all this, is there a thinking on how we can better streamline or kind of join or group groups in a way? Is there some opportunities or in the roadmap to provide that?
So just to make sure I understand the question, or maybe let me try to answer. I mean, there's a couple of problems that we're looking at, that we're working on, which is there's the case of a new hire. Someone joins AvePoint or Hyperfish, and how do we make that person, that he or she, they're working on their Jeremy, so maybe by nature they should join all the groups that Jeremy's a member of, all the marketing groups that maybe Docs has already at AvePoint. So with that use case, so we help them that person on board as quickly as possible and join the channel that are relevant to their role. And then there's the other use case, which is, again, around the same theme of discovery, which is, let's say I'm a long-time employee, but as the structure of the company fluctuates, as project gets spin up and every day, how do I make sure that I potentially join the conversation either as a participant or just to lurk and get up to speed on some great project that my peers are working on? So those are things we're working on actually as we speak. And, we're leveraging some of the things we've already delivered with the Microsoft Graph to, based on your relationship in the org, who you're working with, and what we think matters to you, then we start suggesting document. That's what Dale did. We're going to go a step further and start suggesting groups that potentially might be relevant, whether the group is using Teams or Outlook or Yammer. So yeah, we're working on really improving that notion of discovery so you don't miss a beat. And again, today with the advances in machine learning and stuff like that, we can already do a pretty good job at guessing what's relevant to you.
Got it. No, that's awesome. Jeremy, we're about 3 minutes before we wrap up. Any insights or thoughts around that on how we can better streamline and really make sense and leverage the power of groups?
Yeah, I would say, much like Christophe was going, the best way to kind of engage with your organization is to take the people that are already using distribution lists, go find those groups and have conversations with those kind of the subject matter experts that maybe have these DLs that have been going on for years within your organization, and encourage them to migrate over. I think that doing that and doing simple things like, hey, do you remember when you've always shared the attachment actually in the email that you sent on the distribution list? And that question comes up on the DL all the time. Why not leverage the files capability of Office 365 groups, put the attachment there, and then that way you can just keep sending the hyperlink in email and encourage people to go check the files location for the Office 365 group, rather than kind of searching through the inbox to find where that attachment was in the DL. And I think the benefit of that from a file aspect as well is that then what happens is if you want to update that document, you can, because you're referencing to that central source of the truth, and you can go and update it, rather than have this fear of 1,000 versions of that same document that has been attached in the various different conversations over the years in a distribution list. And so I think that's really going to help your organization to kind of have that one central source of the truth, and I believe that will show power within your user base really quickly and ramp people up on kind of the power of having the service and the ability of all the additional services it brings together.
Awesome. So a couple of things. We got 2 minutes. I'm respectful of everybody's time. So as I've committed up front, as we started this webinar, this recording we made available. We'll push it out. All the questions that were unanswered, we'll continue working with Christophe and Jeremy, some of our subject matter experts, and publish out an FAQ and answer a lot of the questions. Quick pulse. If you guys are still on, is this beneficial? Just pop in your response on the Q&A. We'd love some feedback if this format works out, because we want to do more of this. We want to help educate people, especially with all the new technology steps coming up from Office 365. Just provide some feedback. I love it. It's great. I want more. Or maybe I suggest you do this, that, the other. Or any future guests you want, we're going to do our best to get them on board in this type of format. Hopefully you found it beneficial. And Jeremy, boy, can you tell everybody about your free offering you want to give people?
Yeah, sure. So if you go to hyperfish.com right now, you can run a free analyzer and basically log in with your Office 365 account or your on-premises credentials. And we'll give you a free PDF report that will actually show you your profile completeness across your entire organization. So you'll have a good understanding about how many of your users have a manager field populated or don't, or how many people have profile photos or don't. And if you look at Delve and the way things are going in the Microsoft services space, you really aren't unlocking the power of your investments you already have unless you have that data captured for all of your users. So go check that report out, and you can find out a little bit more about Hyperfish while you're there.
Awesome. And again, Christophe, thanks so much for joining us. Any last words you want to tell everybody?
No, again, thank you for your time. I apologize for the technical audio difficulty. But, as I mentioned, I really want you guys to broaden your horizon. There's a diversity in the workforce, and there's different needs for collaboration. And I really want you to think just beyond, let's say, email and beyond the usual suspects that you provided to your users in the past, and really consider the entire suite that you purchase and enable your end users to leverage it.
Awesome. And like I said, I hope to see everybody in 2 weeks for Best Practice Solutions. We'll talk about what's available out of the box Office 365, how you can best manage and ensure sustainable adoption around your Office 365 investments, and groups is a big part of it. This is Dr. Raymond from AvePoint, and thank you for joining. And let's continue the conversation between now and 2 weeks. Jump on Twitter. Feel free to follow myself, Jeremy, and Christophe. But other than that, have a great day, and looking forward to continue to engage with everybody. Thank you.